He told me my skin was a canvas waiting for its masterpiece. I didn't realize he meant it to be a cage with his eyes as the bars. The bell above the door of the daily grind was a liar. It chimed with a cheerful, unassuming tinkle, promising warmth and the bitter comfort of caffeine. For weeks, that sound had announced his arrival. He never gave a name, so the staff called him Nix. A whisper of a name for a ghost of a man. He was a sculpture of shadows and sharp angles, dressed in monochrome blacks and grays that seemed to drink the California sunlight. He'd take his black coffee to the corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl, and he would watch. Maya would feel the weight of his gaze on the back of her neck as she frothed milk, the pressure of it a physical thing, like a phantom touch. He wasn't leering, not in the way other men did. It was something colder, more analytical. He was studying her, memorizing the cartography of her face, the way a stray strand of her dark hair would catch on her lip when she concentrated. Her coworker, Lena, thought it was romantic. "He's totally smitten, Maya," she'd whisper. "He looks at you like your art." But it didn't feel like adoration. It felt like appraisal. Her shift ended at 10. The alley behind the coffee shop was a shortcut, a grimy passage she'd walked 1,000 times, its familiar stench of stale beer and damp cardboard a strange sort of comfort. Tonight, the comfort was gone. A shape detached itself from the deeper shadows of a dumpster. Her breath hitched. The man was big, formless in the dim light, and he moved with a predatory swiftness that turned her blood to ice. Her keys clattered to the pavement. A rough hand grabbed her arm, another clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. Panic, raw and electric, seized her. Then a second shadow moved, faster, more precise. There was a sickening thud, a grunt of pain, and the pressure on her vanished. She stumbled back, gasping, her eyes struggling to make sense of the tangled forms on the ground. It was Nix. He moved with a brutal economy, a coiled spring of violence she never would have suspected. He didn't just stop the attacker, he dismantled him. In moments, the would-be mugger was a groaning heap, and Nix was turning to her, his knuckles bloody, his chest heaving slightly. "Are you all right?" His voice, usually a low murmur from across the cafe, was a resonant baritone, laced with what she thought was genuine concern. She could only nod, her body trembling uncontrollably. He shrugged off his expensive-looking black jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled of ozone, clove, and something sterile like antiseptic. He picked up her keys, his movements calm and deliberate. "Let me walk you home," he said. It wasn't a question. That night, he was her guardian. He stayed with her while she filed a police report, his presence a silent, solid wall against the shaking and the fear. He spoke for her when her voice failed. He made her tea in her own kitchen, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate porcelain. He was her savior, the quiet observer who had stepped out of the shadows to protect her. Her fear of him melted away, replaced by a deep, unsettling gratitude. A week later, the fear of the alley had faded to a dull thrum, but the memory of his protection was sharp and vivid. He started speaking to her at the shop, short sentences that slowly unspooled into conversations. He learned about her abandoned art school dreams, her love for charcoal sketches. She learned almost nothing about him, except that he was an artist, too. "You should see my studio sometime," he said one afternoon, his dark eyes holding hers. "It's private. I don't show it to anyone." The offer was casual, but the implication was anything but. She was being invited into the inner sanctum. She was special. "I'd love that," she said, her heart fluttering with a dangerous mixture of curiosity and pride. His studio was in a converted warehouse in the arts district, a monolithic block of concrete and steel with no name on the door. He led her up a rattling freight elevator, the industrial groan echoing the sudden anxiety in her gut. The doors opened, and she stepped into a space that was less an artist's studio and more a surgical theater. The air was cool and smelled of rubbing alcohol. Everything was black leather, polished chrome, and frosted glass. There were no canvases, no paint, no clay. On the pristine white walls, framed in stark black, were photographs of his work. Tattoos, but they were unlike any she had ever seen. Hyper-realistic, impossibly detailed pieces that seemed to live and breathe on the skin of his anonymous clients. "This is incredible," she breathed, walking from one frame to the next. "It's my life's work," he said from behind her, "and I'm almost finished." He walked to the heavy steel door they'd entered through. She heard a sound that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life, the solid, definitive thunk of a deadbolt sliding into place. Her blood ran cold. She turned slowly, her manufactured smile faltering. "What was that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to a wall she hadn't noticed, one shrouded by a black velvet curtain. With a single, fluid motion, he pulled the curtain aside. Her own face stared back at her. Dozens of faces, all hers. Charcoal sketches, so detailed they looked like photographs. Her laughing with Lena. Her staring out the window on a rainy day. Her asleep on the bus. And one, chillingly, of her cowering in the alley. He had been watching her for months, not as a man watches a woman, but as a collector watches a specimen. "You're very expressive," he said, his voice a clinical caress. "Every fleeting emotion is visible, a perfect canvas." "The mugging," she whispered, the truth a shard of ice in her stomach. "That was you." "A fabrication," he corrected, his tone devoid of remorse. A necessary catalyst. I needed to see you stripped bare of your daily pretenses. I needed to see your fear. It was inspiring. He was not a savior. He was the architect of her terror. The ground beneath her dissolved. Every kind word, every moment of perceived safety was a meticulously crafted lie. Her mind reeled, searching for an escape, for a rational explanation, but finding only the cold, hard walls of the studio and the dispassionate gaze of her captor. Why? The word was a pathetic squeak. All my life I have searched for the perfect medium, the perfect subject. Skin is alive. It feels, it bleeds, it heals. It makes the art a living thing, he explained, walking toward a sleek black leather chair that looked unnervingly like a repurposed dental recliner. But every piece I've done felt incomplete. A beautiful image on a stranger who then walks away. The art becomes theirs. I am merely the technician. He stopped in front of her, his proximity suffocating. But you are different. The art I create on you will not be for you, it will be for me. You will be my final piece. A living, breathing masterpiece that completes my collection. You are my legacy, Maya. He saw the fight in her eyes, the frantic calculations. There is no escape, he said calmly. The door is soundproof, the windows are reinforced. No one knows you're here, no one even knows this place exists. He wasn't wrong. She had told Lena she was going on a date, but had been vague with the details, embarrassed by the thrill of his secrecy. She had walked into her own cage, the fight drained out of her, replaced by a hollow, ringing dread. This was happening. She looked at the drawings again, at the fear he had shown in the alley. It was inspiring, he had said. A small, fragile thought lit up in her dark despair. He wasn't just a man who liked hurting people. He was an artist, a twisted, cruel artist, but still an artist. And what does an artist need? Inspiration. He lived on her fear. Her terror was the color in his art. If he needed her fear to make his masterpiece, what would happen if she stopped being afraid? He left her in the main room while he went to a back chamber to prepare. The hum of a machine started, low and ominous. She sank into a leather sofa, her body limp with a strange new resolve. She would not scream. She would not cry. She would not give him the satisfaction. She would become the one thing he could not work with, a willing canvas. He returned wearing sterile black gloves, his face a mask of intense focus. He held a small tray. On it was a tattoo machine, gleaming and lethal, along with pots of ink and antiseptic wipes. He was all business now, the predator transformed into the craftsman. "Take off your shirt," he commanded softly, "and lie face down on the chair." Her hands shook, but she obeyed. The act of undressing felt like the ultimate surrender, stripping herself not just of her clothes but of her identity. She was no longer Maya, the barista. She was a piece of raw material. The leather of the chair was cold against her bare stomach. She heard the rustle of paper. He had the design ready. She felt the cold, damp press of the stencil paper against her back, between her shoulder blades. He peeled it away slowly. "Look," he commanded. He held up a large, ornate mirror in front of her, angling it so she could see her own back. There, in purple ink, was the outline. It was 2 eyes. They were large, hyper-realistic, and staring directly forward. The detail was already astonishing. She recognized the shape, the intensity. They were his eyes. "So I will always be watching you," he whispered, his voice resonating with possessive triumph. "You will never be alone again. You will always be mine." The brand was chosen. The ownership was declared. She lay back down, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing. The plan. Remember the plan. The buzz of the machine started, a high-pitched, angry wasp next to her ear. She flinched, a tremor running through her despite her resolve. He placed a steadying hand on her lower back. A gesture that was meant to be calming but felt like a manacle. Then it came. A sharp, searing pain, like 100 tiny, hot needles dragging through her skin. A gasp escaped her lips, a sound of pure, animal pain. In the periphery of her hearing, she heard him take a sharp, satisfied breath. He was feeding. The first ior was agony. Every line was a fresh wave of fire. Her entire body was rigid, every muscle clenched against the onslaught. Tears streamed silently from her eyes, soaking the paper towel covering the headrest. This was what he wanted. He worked with a feverish intensity, the needle dancing across her skin with masterful precision. But as the iors crawled by, something changed. The sharp peaks of pain blurred into a constant, throbbing ache. Her mind, desperate for escape, began to detach. She started to focus on the machine's rhythm, the vibration in her bones, the methodical wipe of the cloth on her raw skin. And then she began to act. "The line work is very clean," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. The buzzing stopped. She could feel his surprise. "What? Is that a single needle for the lashes?" she asked, forcing a tone of genuine curiosity into her voice. "The detail is amazing." There was a long pause. The machine started again, but the rhythm was different, less confident, more hesitant. She pressed on. She asked him about his shading technique. She commented on the brand of his ink. She transformed herself from a terrified victim into an appreciative student. She gave him the one thing his ego craved more than fear, admiration. But it was false admiration, a hollow shell. He grew quiet. The confident hum of his focus was replaced by a tense silence, punctuated only by the angry buzz of the needle. She could feel the frustration building in the pressure of his hand on her back. His movements became choppier. He'd tattoo for a minute, then stop, wipe the area, and stare at it for a long time. Her fear was his muse, and the muse had left the building. He was just a man with a needle, tracing a design onto a piece of numb, compliant skin. The sadistic thrill was gone. The divine spark of his art was extinguished. "It's not right," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "The shadows, they're flat." He was a master technician, but his art required a specific emotional component from his canvas. Without her terror, the eyes he was creating lacked the soul he wanted to capture. He wasn't tattooing his gaze onto her, he was just rendering a picture. It was a failure. They continued for what felt like an eternity. The atmosphere in the room grew thick with his frustration. He became rougher, less precise. The pain intensified, but now it was just pain, not terror. It was a physical sensation she could endure. Her spirit was locked away where he couldn't touch it. She had found his weakness. He was nothing without her fear. "Hold still," he snapped, his voice frayed. A line had gone slightly astray, a tiny imperfection that would be invisible to anyone but him. To him, it was a gaping flaw. He put the machine down with a clatter and leaned in close, wiping at the spot furiously with a cloth. He was distracted, enraged by his own creative impotence. His masterpiece was ruined. His focus was entirely on the flawed square inch of her skin. This was her chance. Her body, which had been feigning compliance, exploded into motion. In one fluid movement, she twisted and kicked backward, her heel connecting solidly with his knee. He cried out, a sharp sound of surprise and pain, and staggered back. She scrambled off the chair. On the steel tray beside it, among the ink pots, was a heavy, solid steel bottle of green soap. She grabbed it and swung it with all the force she could muster. It connected with the side of his head with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the floor, not unconscious, but stunned, disoriented. She didn't wait. She ran for the door, her bare back screaming in agony. Her fingers fumbled with the deadbolt. It felt impossibly stiff. Behind her, she heard him groan, stirring. With a final, desperate wrench, the lock turned. She threw the door open and sprinted into the hallway, not looking back. She ran until her lungs burned, and the raw skin on her back felt like it was on fire. She didn't stop until the gray, industrial landscape of the arts district gave way to the familiar streets of her own neighborhood. She stumbled into her apartment as the first rays of dawn were breaking, locking the door and collapsing against it, her body finally succumbing to the tremors she had suppressed for so long. She didn't call the police. What would she say? How could she prove it? His studio was a ghost and he was a phantom. He would simply disappear. After showering, the water a blessed agony on her back, she stood before her bathroom mirror. With a second, smaller hand mirror, she angled it to see. There they were, his eyes, They were a marvel of technical skill, perfectly rendered, hauntingly realistic. But he was wrong. The art wasn't flat, because her contribution wasn't fear, it was survival. Every delicate line of the lashes was etched with her endurance. Every shadow in the iris held her cunning. Every reflection in the pupil was a testament to her will. He had meant to brand her as his property, a monument to his power. Instead, he had given her a permanent record of her own strength. He had wanted to be the one who was always watching. But now, when she looked at them, she saw herself. She saw the woman who walked into a monster's lair and walked out on her own terms. The eyes on her back were not his anymore. They were hers. They were the scars of a battle she had won, and a quiet, haunting promise to herself she would never be a canvas for anyone's masterpiece but her own.